Okay, perfect. So hello, everyone. My name is Nayeli Rico. I am the resource coordinator for the Undocumented Student Program here at UNLV. And today we'll be having a financial aid sort of info session about the alternate need form that we have available for incoming and our current students here at UNLV. I have with us today, we do have Zach Goodwin from the Financial Aid Office. He's the Executive Director for the Financial Aid Office, and he will be leading today's principal presentation. And then we also have the intersection joining us today, providing support as well. But yeah, thank you, Zach, for joining us. If there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can save them until after we're done with the recording part of this session. And we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nayeli, and welcome, folks. I'm going to pull up the presentation here. Nayeli, can you see everything okay?
Yes.
Great. And with that, we can get going. I probably didn't even need to make this as formal as I did, but I want to be sure that there could be a takeaway. So for those of you who are here, by all means, if you would like a copy of this, we have them available, and you can contact us and we'll send you one. Happy to do that. Please feel free to just ask questions as we go. Since it's a smaller group, we definitely have time to take those as we go. Sometimes it's better to kind of clear those things up in the moment rather than waiting to the end when things can be forgotten. So welcome. I'm really glad that we're able to do this. Thank you, Nayeli, and to Dr. Barlow for helping make this happen. And I hope that this will be an ongoing thing that we do for our undocumented students or undocumented future students, as the case may be. So I think it's really important to talk about our efforts here at the university and that there are resources that are available to people. Many times people think that there are not. So happy to spread the word that there are. As you probably know, the kind of gateway, so to speak, to most types of financial aid, including at UNLV, is the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. But because this is a federal application that can be used by schools or other organizations, it's still at its heart a federal application. So it's looking at eligibility for federal student financial aid, and therefore there are limitations in place. Only a citizen, a permanent resident, or I note here on the slide, other permanent immigration statuses. I wanted to bring this up because there are a lot of immigration statuses that actually are eligible for federal student aid that some people don't realize are. For instance, someone who is here in asylum status or refugee status may be eligible, things like that. And that's what I mean by permanent, that these are folks who are kind of in process and plan to be remaining in the United States. So I like to say, just in case, sometimes people are in a valid status and don't even realize that they are. And I mean valid, of course, for federal aid purposes. One rule of thumb is about the Social Security number. It needs to have been issued for some purpose other than for work. Otherwise, you actually cannot even submit and sign your FAFSA without that Social Security number. And I wanted to mention this too specifically because many students who are part of the DACA program do have Social Security numbers, but those are not valid Social Security numbers for this purpose. So that could be another piece of confusion as well. It seems like you could apply, but actually you would not be eligible. So just some important distinctions. And you know what, I'm gonna just jump back and say this now. I did want to say there's a little bit of hope, and this makes me very, very happy. If you have heard at all about the administration's Build Back Better legislation, which has, I feel like it's being debated for the last 6 months. That's not really true, but it's been a very convoluted and frustrating debate. But even in the current version of that bill is an expansion of federal student aid to DACA students. And possibly even beyond just pure DACA status, because that program is, of course, in flux as well. So a lot of moving parts here, but I feel like there actually is a little bit of hope. recognizing your importance and presence in the US, and that maybe some of these benefits will become available moving forward. So fingers crossed. If you are a student, though, who cannot complete the FAFSA, we have built sort of a parallel process called the alternate need form. I don't know why it's called that, but we sort of use it to determine eligibility for types of aid in similar kinds of ways to how we would use the FAFSA information that a student would complete. So, and we really mean it to be a mirror to that, so that you're doing things at the same time through a similar process, applying for the same funds as other people are, so that everyone is kind of on the same page. This would be the form that a DACA student, a non-DACA undocumented student would use, someone who maybe is in some kind of immigration status that isn't federally eligible, or they're not there yet, or international students as well can use this form to apply for aid. The form, I'll walk through it with you later. I can either demo or add screenshots as well. It's fairly straightforward. Mostly we're asking for some basic income information about your parents, if you are a dependent student with your parents, or just about you personally if you were an independent student. Asking about how many people are in your household and how many of those people are currently attending college. So we've kept it very simple. I'm going to jump around a little bit, I apologize. But some things that we are not asking, which you would be asked if you were doing the FAFSA, would be about whether or what type of taxes might be filed, who anyone in your household is. We're only concerned with how many are there, not who they are. And unlike the FAFSA 2, we don't delve into asset information. We're just looking at income and household info. I'm going to go back one slide because I do want to say, in case it applies to anyone who's here, the form that I'll be showing you is for use for next year, so the year beginning fall 2022. But we also know that there are a number of people who could have submitted an ANF for this current year, for 21-22, but didn't. So if that applies to you, you can go through the process, complete one for next year. We will find you and use that to consider you for any funding that might be available this year. Rather than having to do two forms at the same time, it seemed a little silly. Not a good use of your time. This was good timing to have this workshop too, because our priority deadline for aid is coming up November 15th, so just 10 short days away. Normally the alternate need form will be available as of October 1st, same day the FAFSA becomes available for the following fall. For our incoming students, we'll review those who met their priority deadline and begin sending information out in December. For continuing students, you should be notified March. March is really intended to be a safe estimate, so it might even be earlier than that. We just prefer to keep promises rather than break them. So we're hoping for February, but we're going to commit to March. Begin sending out that information. The ANF is an annual process, so it is something that would happen every year that you're here to either continue funds if you're an ongoing student, or to apply for them if you're an incoming student. You know what? Sorry, I'm just going to bounce all over the place. I also want to stress that although November 15th is the priority deadline, it does not mean firm and fast that there is never aid available if you apply on November 16th. It is not a firm cutoff, but because some of our funding sources are limited, especially when they're partially funded by the state, we only have so much in the pot, so to speak. So that's kind of our commitment to saying we're going to fund you if we have it in a timely way. But if there are funds left over, of course, we will still continue to consider students for funds until we run out, effectively, kind of going in date order till it's done. And really, if there's any point I make today that I really want to stress is that, with the exception of federal student aid piece, because remember, that's what the FAFSA is really about. It's an application for federal aid. With the exception of that piece, we as a university, and actually we as a part of a state system, treat you the same in terms of eligibility for other kinds of funds, just like anybody else. So there is no less likelihood or smaller likelihood that you would receive aid or that you would receive less or anything like that. We look at you just like everyone else along the same timeline and process, which is just important to note. I think we really want to support all of our students. So we, of course, want to treat everyone equitably. Very important. In terms of types of aid that might be available to you, we have two types that are coming from UNLV proper, both some academic, or you might hear them called merit scholarships sometimes, and we offer need-based grants as well. The academic scholarships will generally be offered at the time of admission, and it's kind of based on your previous academic history in high school and so forth. And that is something, yes, you'd still apply every year, but that is something that, all else being equal, if you remain in good standing in your program, will just continue year to year. And so the application is more about renewing that scholarship more than anything else. But going through the ANF also allows us to consider you for need-based grant. And just like we try to parallel the FAFSA process as much as possible, we also parallel the federal Pell Grant program. And by that, I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard the term expected family contribution, or EFC. It is a figure that is produced via the FAFSA process. Student provides financial information, it comes up with this calculated number. The ANF helps us do that for you, so that undocumented students, if they have an EFC that would have made them eligible for the federal Pell Grant, if they were able to receive the federal Pell Grant, they will receive the same amount that a Pell Grant recipient would receive. Our Tuition Plus program, the plus is really plus books. That's what it's based on. It's the maximum Pell Grant plus a portion of, I believe it's about $1,000 for books, or just to kind of assist with those book expenses. So if you completed a FAFSA, were eligible for a Pell Grant of $2,000, okay, but you're doing the ANF, if your EFC would qualify you for $2,000 in Pell, if you could receive Pell, we will give you $2,000 of Tuition Plus, and then some additional for to assist with your books. So it would be more around $3,000. And this way, again, we're kind of treating you fairly with students who can complete the FAFSA. Because it's a need-based grant, though, so academic scholarships, as I mentioned, applying is more about just renewing them from year to year. For need-based grants, financial situations can change from year to year. So students may come in and out of eligibility over the course of their years at UNLV, depending on the family's financial circumstances. So they could receive Tuition Plus one year and not the other, and then come back to it later, things like that. Our undocumented students are eligible as well if they meet the criteria, of course, for the state's Governor Goodwin Millennium Scholarship Fund. This was the easiest way, I think, to actually show you all the criteria, because you don't want me reading them off to you. But essentially, if you had a pretty good GPA of 3.25 in high school and graduated from Nevada public or private school, having been there at least 2 years during high school, and are a resident in the state, then you can generally receive this scholarship. The rules for it are a bit stricter in some ways than UNLV's rules. You have to be full-time. You receive what is called a strike if you don't meet one of the requirements, whether that's a GPA requirement or you weren't full-time or one of those things. And I believe 2 strikes and you will lose Millennium eligibility, but there are appeal processes for that if there's a special circumstance there or what have you. But generally speaking, a full-time student will receive about $1,200 per term, or $2,400 for the year, which is great. It's about a third of your fee costs at UNLV as an in-state student. So it makes a big difference. So if you have a scholarship and Millennium, and maybe even a small need-based grant, chances are your fees will be covered or mostly covered, which of course is good news. But with these types of funds, it is really important that you understand what the renewability requirements are for them. And probably, I think the most significant has to do with enrollment status. So a number of UNLV scholarships and also Tuition Plus, I might add, that need-based grant, do require full-time enrollment, which is 12 credits here. We are in the midst of evaluating our scholarship policy, so I'm hoping they will slightly ease up. The old policy was if you had a term where you were less than full-time and did not appeal for an exception, you would actually lose that scholarship forever and always. I guess we're kind of fortunate in this office that we have a lot of new leaders. So we're thinking about a lot of these policies and don't really love that as a policy. The point is to help you finish your program, and just because you had to be part-time one time shouldn't mean that you have to lose it for the entire remainder of your degree. And our concern, especially with undocumented students, is that because there isn't federal aid eligibility, even if you lose a grant, someone who receives federal aid maybe can take a loan. You don't necessarily have that option. Sometimes you can go to a private loan, but usually a cosigner would be required. It's kind of a tough process, and usually interest rates and so forth will not be in your favor. So they have a fallback. As an undocumented student, you don't have so much of a fallback. So we would hate to have you lose these things. So keep an eye out for those. We've also been very flexible during the pandemic and not holding students to the full-time requirement at all, actually, for the last 4 terms. We will start going back to it, but again, we hope that it will be a bit more flexible moving forward. It is important to note too that most of these have caps in some shape or form. The Millennium Scholarship I was talking about a moment ago, it has a $10,000 lifetime cap as well. If you are full-time though, at $2,400 a year, you will be, I think it's $400 shy of $10,000. So it maybe sounds different than it really is as a full-time student. But so there's that limitation. Most UNLV scholarships, students can receive up to 135 credit hours. So a little bit more than would be required normally for a bachelor's. And students also need to maintain satisfactory academic progress. What this means for financial aid purposes, this is kind of, sounds very academic, but it's only quasi-academic. It's really about aid eligibility. Is that we're looking at a GPA of at least 2.0 and that someone is completing at least 70% of their courses. This is the same requirement that we use for our federal aid recipients, and it's based on the federal rule. But I'm pleased to say this is a relaxation of many of our scholarship eligibility requirements that were requiring a higher GPA than we used to. Tuition Plus, for example, currently required 2.25 as a GPA. So I'm glad. I think it's a good thing to be holding people to a similar and equitable standard. And it's so easy academically. Sometimes all it takes is one bad term and you will lose a scholarship because you're not maintaining that higher GPA. This kind of levels the playing field a bit and just helps ensure that if you have a bad term, okay, it's all right, because the standard is just a little bit lower and helps people keep it and move forward. And that is the point, after all. So in addition to those different types of UNLV assistance, Millennium Scholarship from the state, we have a number of resources on campus, and it seems like, again, I've only been here a few months with UNLV, but the longer I'm here, I keep finding out of new sources, which is wonderful. There are many offices on campus that are here to support you, the intersection and the undocumented student program being 2 primary ones that have resources of all kinds, whether that's academic support. You'd be better prepared to tell me, Nieli, than I am, but academic and financial support, as well as some other kinds of support. Similarly, the Student Support Center and Student Support. This sounds very funny. I'm just going to keep saying student support over and over again. They're actually 2 different offices, but with some similar purposes. The Student Support Center is very broad in some ways, as the intersection is, in that you can receive academic assistance there. You can receive assistance on being a better budgeter or seeking out other types of aid, those kinds of support. Whereas student-support, if you see in the web URL there, is mostly there to help save you money, or if there are times of crisis, they're there to help in a crisis. And that can mean a health crisis or mental health crisis, but often also refers to a financial emergency in your life, and also can direct you to other resources available on campus that aren't necessarily just money in the direct sense. So if you are struggling at all with food insecurity, we do have our food pantry here on campus that is available to all. If you are struggling with housing insecurity, they may be able to assist you in perhaps obtaining campus housing or finding some emergency funding if, say, you've fallen behind on rent. We all know what's happening with rent in the Las Vegas area, or other kinds of emergency grants. Internet service at home, we do partner with Cox for very reduced rate internet service that I think is under $30 a month. All of these kinds of things, to whether it's finding actual direct cash to help you or finding resources in lieu of cash that can help you, they are a great resource as well. Coming closer to home, to the financial aid office, I don't believe in the past we used to do this actually, but you do have the option to appeal your financial aid. I just listed our forms page here because there is a form that goes with it. But essentially, some good examples might be if there's been a significant income change with your parents, for example. This happened a lot during the pandemic, as I'm sure you can imagine. Now the application for next year is, as I mentioned before, is collecting 2020 information, which is the quote unquote pandemic year. But I think we have to also acknowledge it's not over. And the economy is still struggling. People are still losing jobs or continuing not to find new jobs if they're searching. The market is very competitive. So if what you're telling us about 2020 doesn't adequately represent where you are financially today, it may be worth submitting an appeal. We probably ask you to complete a new alternate need form with the new information, and therefore could reconsider you for aid based on that new information rather than what came across the first time. So that is a possibility for you. That can be probably a good resource or a better resource if it's an ongoing issue, like what I was describing of a long-term loss of income, because it will affect aid eligibility for that whole year. If it's more of a one-time thing, say you've fallen 2 months behind on rent and need to get caught up, but that is the mainstay of your concern right then. Student support, I mentioned, may be able to help you, but we are now in round 3 of funding for the Higher Education Emergency Relief, or HERF Fund. In the first initial rules around these federal funds, they were only available to students who met the federal student aid eligibility requirements. Now that is changed as of, I want to say maybe May, so that we can offer it as well to any students. So this means undocumented students too. So this actually is a federal resource that is currently available. If you have a financial emergency, pretty much anything anymore, it seems COVID related, because it just is, whether it's about rental issues, temporary income loss, any of those kinds of things. Also, a lot of people have recently lost unemployment income, all of these kinds of things. So you can make a request. It's kind of a two-tiered process. We are automatically sending funds to some students with fewer resources, just outright. We just ran about $18 million worth of funds out to students. It was about 18,000 UNLV students were offered anywhere from $500 to $2,000 just outright. That did include undocumented students, but we know that only included undocumented students that had done a current year ANF. So for those who are doing next year's ANF, if you remember my saying before that we're going to also use that for the current year, this is one of the purposes we're using it for. So we're now actually going through for those students who did not do a current year ANF to see if they would have qualified in our first run. But that I also acknowledge may take another 2 or 3 weeks to get through. So if there is a much more urgent need than that, and you can't wait 2 or 3 weeks for a response from us, you can write this email address. We're not asking students for lots of documentation, but just an understanding of what's happened, what the financial impact of that was. In general, in fact, I can't think of a single case where we've said no. So that's good. And usually we've offered anywhere from $500 to $3,000, depending on the nature of the expenses and how big they were. So this is here for you. It is here all year, and possibly we will be allowed to let those funds carry over a little bit past the end of spring if they're not spent. Because of course we want to spend them on students. That's what they're for. So we hope we don't lose any if it doesn't get spent by the end of the year. So fingers crossed. There are also, I say this anecdotally, but I think an increasing number of scholarship organizations that have opened up resources to undocumented students. Some are more general. If you see the URLs that are listed here, sites like scholarships.com or fastweb.com have been around for years, and they're effectively just scholarship information clearinghouses. So they're just a collection of national scholarships. Some of them are more local that you can look through. There are a couple, though, that are a little more targeted. The PEF.org, which is Public Education Foundation, it does have a couple of scholarships that are specifically for undocumented students from Nevada. So it's a little narrower, which is good. And Immigrants Rising, which is a resource I only recently became aware of, this is what its primary resource is for, is to assist undocumented students among some other immigrant statuses. So they have a number of scholarships listed there in their own clearinghouse. I will warn you, if you go there, their website is not super intuitive, but I was able to get to stuff. So if you have trouble finding anything, let me know. I'm happy to help guide you. And then I would be remiss if I did not mention the very recently announced, just last week, our new partnership with the DreamUS, which is a funding organization also specifically for undocumented students across the country. If you are an incoming student, this might apply to you. You can see the criteria listed there, but this might apply to you. Or if you are here but won't have earned more than 21 credits by the end of spring, well, or I guess by summer if you decide to go to summer school. So if you're just in my first year of the program and aren't necessarily attending full time, you are also potentially eligible to apply. That application period closes in February. So we've still got a little time to do it, but their funding source is significant. As you can see under the national scholarship area on the left, that you can get covered up to $33,000 toward a bachelor's, and many will also receive a stipend. Our fees are low enough. I don't know if it would ever get to $33,000, but it's still a pretty darn good deal, I would say. So I'm really excited that we have this partnership now in place going forward. It's good. So moving on a little bit to the ANF itself, there used to be a process of using the organization's website, the College Board. They have sort of a FAFSA mirror process as well. We had students complete that, take screenshots of their progress and send it to us. This was both cumbersome, probably unnecessarily complicated, and just create a lot of hassle, I think, for everyone trying to complete it. It is now just an electronic form in the Self-Service Help Center. So you can see this there in the center. I'm going to walk you through just how you find it if you haven't done one already. I'm sorry, this is so small, so hopefully you can see this on your screen. What that red arrow on the top is pointing to is the Submit Forms and Documents drop-down menu. And you would select the alternate need form from that list. Simple enough. It'll bring you up to the welcome screen, remind you if you do need to do a FAFSA, please don't do an alternate need form, as it will just confuse matters. And also reinforcing that if you did not do one for this year, but you are doing it for next year, that we will still take it into consideration for the current year. What we will see first is the form for a student that we would consider independent. It's not going to ask you anything to make that determination. It is actually automatically making that determination based on your birth date. So if you were born after 1999, it will consider you automatically dependent, and it's just going to ask information about your parents. If you were born prior to that time, it will just ask about information for you and a spouse if you're married. It will ask what income was like in 2020. And we try to be very clear, this is all about if you filed a return, then you can find it, the information we're looking for on this line in your tax return. But if you weren't filing a tax return, you can get it from any of your records. I can tell by looking at the ones that have come in, people are actually using their records because these numbers are very specific. Sometimes we see round figures, but most of the time it's been very clearly from their W-2s or just their own records. So not relevant whether you actually did or did not file taxes. That's just there to help you find it, the information that we need. How many people live with you if you are independent and married and have kids or are supporting other family members for that matter, doesn't have to be a child. We will want to include them in your household. So it's effectively you and anyone that you help support. And then how many of you are currently enrolled half-time, which would be 6 credits, but that would be at any college in the country, not UNLV specifically. In this example in front of you, this is someone where I'm going to just say either they have 2 kids or they're married and they have 1 kid, or I don't know, they're supporting their grandparents, but they're the only person in college. And then some space if there is other information that you think would be helpful to us in reviewing your application, you can provide that free form so that we can take a look at that. That's it. That is the alternate need form. When you submit it, oh, I see, I'm sorry, I realized I skipped a screen here. There is a review and submit case you can see what your answers were and be sure everything looks correct to you. You'll see confirmation that it was submitted. If you are considered a dependent student, instead of just asking about you, we will automatically ask about your parents and not you, because the assumption we're making is that you are being supported, not that you are providing support. So we will ask for parent information, but, and this is all the same, it's just about parents and household, same kind of idea. Oh, I apologize. Yes, I just skipped over something, I apologize. At the top of the screen, this is actually a combination of 2 different screens. We do ask if you're able to obtain your parents' information. In this case, the person said yes, and therefore we asked about parent information. If the answer is no, because remember, we're deciding who's dependent or independent based strictly on your birthday. So we have no idea what this means about your actual life, just what your birthday is. So we know, of course, there could be people who were born in 2002 who may not be able to have access to their parent information, may not even live with their parents, they may have no communication with their parents. We don't know, and we just want to capture what your situation is as best we can. So if you can't provide information about your parents, we give you the option to tell us that and give us some information about why, just so that we know. I do think this is funny. I did not make these screenshots, but whoever did was being really morbid when they provided the reason my parents are deceased. However, that is a perfectly valid reason as to why you couldn't provide parent information. And then it will immediately default to what you saw in that independent student application. So we're just going to ask about you, spouse, anyone that you're helping support. But again, generally speaking, you're only going to answer 3 to 5 questions at most, and we're done. Once it is submitted, you will receive this confirmation email just confirming that we did get it. so that you have it. If, by the way, you make an error, if you're doing the alternate need form and you realize after the fact, like, oh shoot, I forgot this, or I made a typo, or whatever the case may be that you didn't notice at the time, all you really need to do is submit a new one. That is another advantage. You go back in, just take 5 more minutes and do a brand new one, and we will see that it's been, that we've received a second one with new information. And the worst that will happen is that we'll reach out to you to say, is this really new information? Was there an error? Tell us about it. You can also include that in the freeform text. So it's very easy to fix if there's any kind of problem. And as I mentioned too, if you ever were to appeal your financial aid eligibility, probably this would be part of that process, to do a new ANF and get more information and submit our form with them. You can always reach us. We're here in person too. I don't mean to imply you can't come to our to our office. Would never say you can only call us, but you have options. So you can call us, of course. We use the self-service help center a lot, and I do actually encourage that only because we can then keep a record of your questions so that no matter who you have talked with, someone can always pick up and help you because of the notes and so forth that are kept there. But that is really it. We have ample time for questions. If you want, we can even demo an ANF. It's pretty straightforward, which is great. Sometimes I feel like I disappoint people because there's so little to say. It's just fast and easy. But it was very important to us too. We did a lot of analysis of just who was submitting ANFs in general. And a lot of the questions that we would have seen on the FAFSA or in the College Board for the old process just didn't apply to the vast majority of our students. And it seems silly to be asking a lot of questions that weren't going to mean anything to you or help us help you. So we were able to shorten it quite a bit.
Thank you, Zach, for this presentation. It was very informative. I'm sure we've all learned something new about this ANF process and of the support services that are available to our students. We'll go ahead and stop recording here. This will be hopefully uploaded on our